On our newscast tonight, more progress with inter-Korean relations. South Korean businessmen with operations at the Gaeseong Industrial Complex finally get a chance to check out the conditions of their facilities, while Pyongyang agreed to meet at Panmunjom tomorrow to discuss family reunions. Another disgraced former president of Korea is in the hot seat for the same reason, the inability to pay fines. But former President Roh Tae-woo says he's finally ready to settle his balance of around $20 million. And UN inspectors are currently in Damascus investigating allegations of chemical weapons use in the same week that opposition fighters are accusing the government of launching a chemical attack against them. They say up to 1,400 people perished as a result. Stay with us for these stories and more.
It's 5 a.m. in Santiago, noon in Damascus, and 6 on a Thursday evening here in Seoul. Welcome to Early Edition at 6. I'm Han Daeun.
And I'm Daniel Chan. Thank you for joining us. Our starting point for today, the latest developments in inter-Korean relations.
South Korean businessmen crossed over into North Korea on Thursday and visited their facilities at the Gaeseong Industrial Complex for the first time in nearly 5 months.
More than 250 people, including government officials, crossed the military demarcation line on Thursday morning, spent the day inspecting their factories and returned to the south at around 5 p.m. An additional group of businessmen are scheduled to visit on Friday. Starting Monday, businessmen will begin maintenance and checkups on their machinery equipment. The visits follow last week's agreement between the two Koreas to restart the factory zone.
After days of butting heads over where to hold talks on resuming reunions for families separated by the Korean War, North Korea has agreed to meet on the South Korean side of the truce village of Panmunjom on Friday. But Pyongyang wasn't quite as understanding when it came to Seoul's stance on talks over a suspended tourism project. Our Unification Ministry correspondent Hwang Sung-hee has more.
North Korea has accepted South Korea's offer to meet at Panmunjom on Friday to discuss ways to resume reunions for families separated since the Korean War. The two had been at odds over the venue for days, with the North pushing to hold the talks at its Mount Kumgang resort, while the South wanted to meet at the South Korean side of Panmunjom. An official from Seoul's Unification Ministry said Thursday that the North notified its change in stance through the Inter-Korean hotline and made a counter-proposal on South Korea's offer to discuss the issue of reopening the Mount Kumgang tourism resort at the end of next month. South Korea suggested earlier this week to hold separate talks on September 25th on reopening the resort to South Korean tourists. The North said the issue cannot wait that long and proposed to meet at the end of this month or the beginning of September. Initially, Pyongyang wanted to hold the talks this week before the Koreas meet for discussions on family reunions. South Korean tours to the Mount Kumgang resort came to an abrupt end in 2008 after a South Korean tourist was shot dead by a North Korean guard. The Unification Ministry said it will have to thoroughly review North Korea's latest proposal before giving an answer. For now, the ministry said the focus is on holding a successful round of reunions for divided families sometime around the Chuseok, or Korean Thanksgiving holiday, next month. Thousands of Korean families were left separated during the Korean War in the 1950s, and the Unification Ministry says more than 80% of the 73,000 registered separated family members in the South are over the age of 70. The ministry said the possibility is open for the reunions to take place at the Mount Kumgang resort as it did in the past, but made clear that even if it does, family reunions and Mount Kumgang tours will be dealt with as two separate issues. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
The Korea Power Exchange issued a level 2 warning this afternoon, putting the country on attention about a possible shortage of power reserves for a second consecutive day. The nation's power authorities have been keeping a keen eye on the power supply this summer, and especially since yesterday, after the abrupt breakdown of a nuclear reactor at the Hanbit Nuclear Power Station in South Jeolla Province, which pushed reserves down to below 3.5 million kilowatts. Officials have once again asked for citizens' cooperation in reducing energy use during peak hours. An announcement on the cause for the Hanbit nuclear reactor's breakdown is expected later today.
The third round of military negotiations between South Korea and the U.S. got underway this Thursday. Topic discussed how the two will divide the cost for keeping U.S. troops on the Korean peninsula. Over the next 2 days, the two allies will try to narrow their differences on how much of the cost Seoul should contribute starting next year. Korea is likely to demand a revision to the cost-sharing system in order to prevent the money from being spent for other purposes, such as relocating U.S. Army bases. A government official in Seoul said Korea may suggest creating regulations that will force the two countries to initially agree upon where the money can be used. United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon arrived in Korea this Thursday afternoon for a 6-day visit. During his stay, Ban will meet with President Park Geun-hye, Prime Minister Chung Hong-won, and Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se and discuss pending global issues concerning the Korean Peninsula and human rights. He is also scheduled to make a keynote speech at the opening ceremony of the 2013 World Rowing Championships in Cheongju, North Chungcheong Province on Saturday. Ban will then attend the post-2015 Korea Forum hosted by the Foreign Ministry on Monday and lay out his vision for the UN's Millennium Development Goals, which are a top priority during his second term in office. 16 years after being sentenced, former Korean President Roh Tae-woo will finally pay off his fine of hundreds of millions of dollars to the country. Roh was sentenced to 17 years in prison and a fine worth about $230 million in 1997 on charges of bribery and treason for the role he played in the 1979 military coup and the following Panmunjom massacre in 1980. Roh, who was pardoned from his prison term, has paid some $210 million so far, but some $20 million had been left unpaid. The in-laws of the former president's son and Roh's brother Jae-woo both have agreed to share the unpaid fine by early September at the latest. The 81-year-old former president has insisted the two shoulder the fine, saying that he had entrusted his slush funds to the two, worth some dozens of millions of dollars, during the early 1990s.
Investors had been hoping for some strong hints about when the U.S. Federal Reserve was planning to start reining in its monetary easing program, but the Fed's Open Market Committee was not forthcoming.
For more, here's our Yurian.
The Federal Reserve has offered few hints on its timeline for tapering off its massive monetary stimulus program. The minutes of the July 30th to 31st meeting released on Wednesday showed most of the 12 members on the Federal Open Market Committee agreed that a change to the stimulus was not yet appropriate. Investors have been eager to find out when the Fed will start winding down its $85 billion in monthly asset purchases. Many expect it will begin September. While the details of the minutes provided few clues as to when it will begin, it did little to dissuade expectations.
Consensus among officials is that the economy is going to improve in the second half of this year as fiscal restraint wanes, consumer confidence has risen, and employment gains have moved to about a 200,000 average, what they're expecting to see, with confidence that it's going to continue going forward. So that is consistent with their view that they should dial back a bit on the near-term stimulus.
The uncertainty about the Fed's intentions has rocked global markets over the past few months, especially when Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke announced in June plans to start scaling back the quantitative easing measures later this year and end it completely by mid-2014. After the release of the minutes, market movement reflected the uncertainty, with major indexes fluctuating in the final hours of trading. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 0.7%, while the S&P 500 fell 0.6% on Wednesday. The Fed will meet again on September 17th for a two-day meeting, which will be followed by a press conference by Bernanke. Yurian, Arirang News.
Taking a look at the local stock market action, Seoul shares fell nearly 1% on this Thursday, extending its losing streak to a fifth consecutive session as the U.S. Federal Reserve's minutes reaffirmed a gradual scaling back of its bond buying program.
The benchmark Kospi went down nearly 1% to close at 1849, while the tech-heavy Kosdaq fell 2.4% to close at 517. On the foreign exchange counter, the Korean currency continued to trade weaker against the greenback, changing hands at 1,122 won.
And now for an expert's perspective on the impact of the U.S. Fed stimulus program on emerging markets, let's turn to Dr. Yang Jun-seok, Associate Professor at the Catholic University of Korea. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming back. So anticipation that the U.S. Fed Reserve is going to ease up on its monetary stimulus program, it actually has foreign investors rushing to take their money out of emerging markets. So explain to us why.
Well, the most obvious answer is that they expect the United States interest rate to go up, so they will get a better return in the United States than in India or Indonesia. But some of the other contributing reason is that because these people are taking their money out of India, the Indian rupee is depreciating, which means the value of the foreign investors' investment in terms of U.S. dollar is shrinking. So rather than take a loss, they might want to get out faster. Also, there's an uncertainty about the Indian economy, so that's making Indian investments less attractive. But also, I want to emphasize that, well, we're uncertain about what the Fed is going to do, what India is going to be like. So if you were sort of a rational investor and you could take your money out and put it back in fairly quickly, then if you're uncertain, take it out, keep it, park it in dollars for now. If things settle down, put it back in. So that's probably also a contributing factor to what's going on in the Indian market.
So how much have the currencies in those emerging countries depreciated?
Well, the Indian currency, the rupee, is the worst hit. If you look at it from July 1st, they've lost about 8.8% of the value. But I think the important thing is right now they're fluctuating almost 1% a day. So it's the volatility that I think has everybody worried. Indonesia has also fallen about 8%. Malaysia has fallen about 4% since July.
Okay, there are mixed opinions about the current market confusion. Some say it's a temporary phenomenon. Others say it's just an overreaction which will come down gradually. But your take, Professor Yang?
Okay, well, if you look at the fundamental statistics of the Indian economy, it doesn't seem that bad. It's not good. But typically, you don't go to crisis with these type of numbers. Their growth rate has fallen from 10%, but they're still growing at around 5% rate, which is not too bad. Their debt to GDP ratio is about 22%. Typically, you don't go to foreign exchange rate crisis over that type of debt. But what is making the problem a bit worrisome is the large fluctuations in the exchange rate itself and the fact that the half of that debt is short-term debt. So they have about $132 billion that they have to pay by next March, and their foreign reserves are currently not enough to cover it. And if the Indian economy continues to do badly, and if there's more and more worries about the financial crisis, there's a real question over whether they'll be able to roll over that short-term debt. That's where you can get the financial crisis.
Now, you've already explained a bit on this, but why is the quantitative easing program so potentially harmful to those emerging economies as opposed to, say, China or U.S. or Europe?
Well, what happened was, and this happened before the Asian financial crisis as well, you had a global low interest rate from the advanced economies. So the investors from the advanced economies, the hot money, seeks where they think the return is going to be the highest. And the money flowed from the United States and Europe into the emerging economies. And the emerging economies which looked the best were the Asian economies. So about nearly $2 trillion flowed into Asian markets, excluding Japan. And only about 600 billion flowed into South America and 400 billion to East Europe. Now, since the advanced countries or the United States seems to be getting better, their interest rate seems to be going up, so the returns there will be higher. They're taking a lot of that money back out. And because this is hot money, quick in, quick out.
Right, lots of developments all around the world. We are connected. And in terms of Korea, with all the recent developments, how vulnerable are we?
Okay, well, we are vulnerable in a sense that we did get rid of a lot of capital controls during the Asian financial crisis, but we've been preparing for this type of event since then. So right now, Korea has about $120 billion of short-term debt. That's second quarter of this year, the latest statistic. So that sounds like a lot, but our net short-term assets, so what we own minus what we owe, is $323 billion. So we can, at least on paper, we can actually pay all the short-term debt back and still have a lot of money left over. Our foreign exchange rate reserves is about $329 billion. So again, we can use those reserves to pay back all the short-term debt, and we'll still have a lot of money left over. And unlike Indonesia or India, we've been having current account surpluses consistently since the global financial crisis. And our growth is not as high as we want, but it's not too bad. So it's likely that we will feel some effect if there's a crisis in Indonesia or India, but it will not be a crisis type of an effect. It's very unlikely to be that. And if you look at the last month or so, money has actually been flowing into Korea rather than flowing out, though daily there's some differences. So we're not in too bad a situation, but as I mentioned earlier, the problem is expectations. If people expect there's going to be a financial crisis, if people believe that, well, Korea will have a large depreciation of the won, the Korea will experience a large capital outflow, then obviously foreigners may want to take their money out, but Koreans also. And if that happens, there's not enough money in the government to stop that. So what's very important right now is controlling expectations, giving confidence that our economy can weather this if nobody panics. And we are different, and we're a bit walled off from the problems that they have in India and Indonesia. So right now, it is very important for the government to get the expectations right, to set up on a policy which makes people think we're prepared, but not panicking. Because if you're panicking, then they think, oh my God, Korea is actually doing worse than what we think. So people will get worried again. So it is very important for government to run this tight middle road. Preparedness, but no panic.
Sounds like something that could be applied not just to the realm of the financial situation or the realm of finances in Korea, but in many other parts of Korea in general.
And I think that's exactly what Finance Minister Hyun Oh-suk's doing.
The sad thing is India doesn't seem to be doing it very well. So that's part of their problem.
Well, Dr. Young, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to having you back here again as soon as possible.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. In other news, Korea's household debt is expected to hit an all-time high this year.
The Bank of Korea estimates that households were carrying around $872.2 billion in household debts as of June, and the number is forecast to reach the $890 million mark by the end of the year. The spike was attributed to the high number of loans being granted to households by financial institutions, particularly ones used to pay off mortgages. Korea's household debt has been on the rise ever since the financial crisis back in 2008, although it did fall slightly last year.
Opposition forces in Syria have accused the government of ordering a massive chemical weapons attack that killed up to 1,400 people, including many women and children. The UN Security Council convened an emergency meeting Wednesday, calling for clarity on the latest incident. We must warn you that there are highly distressing images throughout this report by Connie Lee.
Videos uploaded onto social media sites show people choking and gagging, and rows of bodies laid out after an apparent chemical weapons attack by Syrian government forces. Opposition fighters accuse President Bashar al-Assad's regime of attacking hundreds of people with chemicals near Damascus on Wednesday. Rebels and medics say the death toll could be as high as 1,400, and the numbers are likely to rise, with hundreds more critically wounded all around the area. The UN Security Council held a 2-hour closed-door emergency session on Wednesday, where the Council President said there were strong concerns over what really happened. Earlier, spokesperson for UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon stated that the UN chief was shocked with the latest allegations.
The Secretary-General reiterates that any use of chemical weapons by any side under any circumstances would violate international law.
The Syrian government admitted to carrying out military operations in that area, but denies any use of chemical arms, saying the allegations were illogical and fabricated.
The general leadership of the army confirms these allegations are completely false and are part of the dirty media war that is led by some countries through the media against Syria.
UN inspectors are currently in Damascus investigating previous allegations of chemical weapons use. And following these latest claims, the White House is calling for unrestricted access to all sites in Syria to thoroughly investigate the alleged use of chemical weapons there. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Now moving on to the latest in Egypt. The military-backed government has ordered former President Hosni Mubarak to be transferred from prison to house arrest after a ruling determined he could no longer be imprisoned legally. The international community continues to condemn the recent killings in Egypt, with the EU agreeing to impose an arms embargo on the country. Our Kim Min-ji has the latest.
Egypt's Prime Minister Hassam el-Bablawi ordered late Wednesday that the former President Hosni Mubarak be placed under house arrest after he is released from prison. The announcement comes days after a court ruling said the former president can no longer be kept behind bars legally. Officials say that the transfer could take place as early as Thursday. The 85-year-old who led Egypt for 3 decades has spent 17 months in prison. The release of the ex-leader comes at a time of ongoing instability in Egypt following a brutal crackdown on protesters and the arrest of senior members of the Muslim Brotherhood. More than 900 people, including civilians, have been killed over the past week. The turmoil in Egypt has also deeply alarmed the international community. The European Union agreed Wednesday to suspend the export of arms and security equipment to Egypt due to the mounting violence in the country. However, the bloc will continue economic assistance, as a cutback on aid would hurt Egyptian people more than it would the government. Meanwhile, the violence has also prompted Washington to take a harder stance on Egypt, and it is also reviewing whether its aid program should be suspended. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Moving on to other stories, China's so-called trial of the century is underway. Disgraced politician Bo Xilai faces charges of bribery, corruption, and abuse of power. During his trial on Thursday, Bo denied the bribery allegations against him. He stands accused of taking around $4 million in bribes from 2 businessmen. Many expect the rising political star will be found guilty of all charges and be sentenced to life in prison. Bo's life was turned upside down last year after his wife was found guilty of murdering British businessman Neil Haywood. Korea's multi-purpose satellite, the Arirang 5, is scheduled to be launched tonight, slightly before midnight Korea time. The latest version has a special radar that's capable of observing the Earth's surface no matter the time of the day or the weather conditions. Our Song Ji-sun has the details.
Arirang 5, South Korea's multi-purpose satellite, also known as COMSAT 5, is set to blast off at 8:39 p.m. Thursday night local time, from Russia's Yasny launch site, located some 1,800 kilometers southeast of Moscow. The most notable feature of this latest satellite is its SAR, short for Synthetic Aperture Radar, that can observe and photograph the Earth's surface at any time, regardless of weather conditions. Once deployed, the satellite will orbit the Earth at an average altitude of 550 kilometers, monitoring the ocean, the environment, and natural disasters, along with its predecessors, the Arirang 2 and 3 satellites. But the Arirang 5 has a leg up on those that came before it. The previous models aren't able to capture images when it's cloudy or dark, but Arirang 5's SAR makes that possible, meaning scientists will gain access to data that they haven't had before. Arirang 5 will provide high-resolution images as precise as 1 meter resolution. About 15 minutes after takeoff, the satellite will detach from its carrier, and engineers on the ground are expected to make first contact with Arirang 5 6 hours later. From then on, the satellite will be on duty 24 hours a day for the next 5 years, observing and sending data from its orbit. 송지선, Arirang News.
It's time for weather. We turn to our Hannah Kim. Hello there, Hannah.
It looks like you're going to need an umbrella tonight, Daniel, because a low-pressure system is slowly building up and it will bring heavy rain tonight.
So, Hannah, how much rain are we talking about?
Town, in general, we expect about 30 to 80 millimeters of rainfall and over 100 millimeters of rain in the northern part of the central provinces. With that said, you may also need to take caution with flooding. We'll have a lot of rain overnight and until tomorrow. Now, we expect a slight drop in our daily highs tomorrow, so if we take a closer look at the forecast, some of our readings will finally fall into the 20s. Seoul will start off the morning at 25 and reach 29 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, cities in the south should have rain until Sunday, but temperature-wise, Daegu will peak to 30. Down on Jeju Island, you'll have lighter showers, but under cloudy skies. Daejeon and Dokdo will both drop to 28, while Mount Kumgang remains at 31. Well, that's all I have for you today. I'm Hannah Kim, and back to you guys.
Thanks, Hannah. And that's all from us. Thank you for watching.
Keep it tuned to Arirang for more news coming out your way.